Today we begin by welcoming one of our own aviators, the Commanding General of the 101st Airborne Division, AASLT, and the host unit for this year's Quad A. Ladies and gentlemen, Major General Jim McConville.
Well, thanks, EJ. It's great to be here with you today. I was very blessed to serve in my 1st Cavalry Unit at Fort Ord, California. EJ was our Troop XO. Major General retired Jim Kelly was our Troop Commander. Brigadier General retired R. Dennis Kerr was our Squadron Commander. Brigadier General retired John Daly was our Aviation Brigade Commander. Wally Golden was a Scout Platoon Leader. Jim Richardson was a Scout Platooner, and there's a whole bunch of colonels out there that we kind of grew up together in the Cavalry. And it was a wonderful place to soldier, a great place for families, and a fabulous place to live. And that is precisely why the Army got rid of it. And as I was preparing to talk, I was looking at an old speech that I gave at a Quad A event right when I just took command 3 years ago. And in that speech, I began, I just left OCLL, and I began by telling the audience how happy I was to be out of D.C., away from the congressional battles, and I quipped that old cliche that the worst day in a unit with troops is far better than the best day at the Pentagon. Well, based on my next assignment, I may not be using that speech anymore. As I traveled around yesterday and I look out the audience today, we have some of our great general officers who have done incredible things. I want to welcome all of them. It was great to see General Doug Brown, who the 160th complex at Fort Campbell is named after, and I had a chance to work for him. I saw many of our past branch chiefs, some of our great aviation heroes like our Medal Honor recipient, Colonel Crandell. It's great to see our super warrant officers, both current and retired, and our NCOs. And as you get older, you see folks that you served with as W1s and W2s and sergeants, and now they're sergeant majors, and they've done great things. And it was great to see CW5 Steve Davison selected for the Aviation Hall of Fame. Steve epitomizes what we look for in our great senior warrant officers. I was doing the math, and Steve was a CW5 23 years ago when I first served with him. And so he's done, and he continues to serve and continues to do great things. The other thing is, I'd like to recognize T.C. Freeman, who's one of our CASAs. And at Fort Campbell, we're incredibly blessed because the 101st Airborne Division is the hometown team. And we have these wonderful civilians. People sometimes say they're tired of the war. And the 101st Airborne Division, a lot of us have had the privilege of coming back and forth. But our civilians have stayed there. They're there at every welcome home ceremony. They give us incredible support. So TC, I want to thank you and all our folks around Fort Campbell for what you do. And I'd like to offer a special congratulations to John Evans in the 160th. We're very, very proud to have them at Fort Campbell. We're proud of the great contributions. General Campbell yesterday talked about that mission that a lot of folks haven't talked about. But also really thankful for the cutting-edge tactics, techniques, and procedures that developed over the years, from everything from night vision goggle flight to long-range navigation to aerial gunnery to overwater operations, to name a few. We have a special bond with them, enjoy the teamwork, and we're very, very proud to have them living across the runway. The picture you're going to see behind me is on a recent brigade air assault with our 3rd Brigade Rocket Sons under J.B. Vowell and our 101st Cav under Tom Drew. And I think this picture is appropriate because it shows what aviation is all about in the 101st Airborne Division, and quite frankly, in every other division in the Army, and that is supporting our soldiers on the ground. As many of you know, the 101st just returned from Afghanistan, although we still have 2 brigades in harm's way, our 2nd Brigade under Pete Benchoff and a 159 Cav under Jimmy Blackman, and they're serving on the great 10th Mount Division under a former Screaming Eagle, Steve Townsend. And since we've been back, I've been a little surprised about how little there is in the news about Afghanistan. given that we have soldiers still serving in harm's way. I know many of the folks in the audience have served in Afghanistan, and I'd like to take a few minutes to update you on where I think we are in the fight. We had the privilege in Regional Command East of not only working with all the brigades from the 101st, but also with the great 10th Mountain Division. We had 5 brigades from them, all 4 infantry brigades, and their combat aviation brigade under Dave Francis. We had 2 brigades from the 1st Cavalry Division, 2nd Brigade and 4th Brigade, and we had a brigade from the 3rd Infantry Division, their 4th Brigade, along with numerous battalions, and some of the folks are here that I really won't be able to mention because I could go on and on forever and ever. In the 3 different aviation brigades, we had the 101st, commanded by Paul Bontrager, 10th Cav under Dave Francis, I said, and then 159 under Jimmy Blackman. And I can report to you that all of our soldiers and aviators did a fabulous job in the toughest terrain and really the most challenging, weather against a ruthless and indiscriminate enemy. And for a lot of our gray-beard aviators out there, I can tell you, you can be very, very proud of how well these aviators lived up to your legacy and fought every single day in support of our troops on the ground. And the trust they had with the troops on the ground was built on valorous acts, it was built on never quitting, and it was built on never leaving anyone behind. And no matter what the situation is, when the soldiers on the ground needed aviation, aviation was there. And I was, as a division commander, I speak, not as an aviator, I was extremely proud of our aviation. Now, if I could describe what's going on in Afghanistan, again, it's hard to, even back here, haven't been there, to really understand what's going on. I would describe Afghanistan in 2 words, and that would be security transition. Can you go to the next slide? One of the key functions of leaders is to get their organizations ready for change and then lead and manage the transitions that follow. I use this slide that I'm showing behind me really to help our leaders and soldiers see where they were in the fight. As I said earlier, many of our soldiers have been in Afghanistan before. They fought there, and when you go back to a place you've been before, there's a tendency to want to fight the last fight better. When reality is we want to win the present fight in the present operational and strategic environment. When the 101st was in Afghanistan in 2008, 2009, under the great commander Jeff Schlosser, the Afghan security forces, they were limited in size and capability. So we conducted many of our operations unpartnered. And if you can see from the circles, most of the fighting was done by ISAF, coalition, or U.S. forces, with a very little being done by the Afghan forces. As we surged forces in 2010 to 2011, and we increased the quantity and quality of the Afghan security forces, and then the 101st Airborne Division under our vice, who spoke yesterday, General John Campbell, many of the operations, they started to move to what we would call partner-type operations. We even had a name for it. We called it Shana Bashana, which is Dari for shoulder to shoulder. And the Afghans began to pick up much, much more of the fight, although we were still partnered at the company and Kandak or battalion level. When we arrived in 2012, we had a mandate. And the mandate was that no later than 2014, we would be withdrawing our forces. And since the Afghan security forces had continued to improve, we moved aggressively into the advise and assist mode, or what we would call Bashana, over the shoulder. The Afghans picked up most of the fighting, and we downsized our regional command. To just give an idea of the downsizing that we went through during the fighting season in contact, we went from 6 brigades to 2 brigades. We went from 58 bases to 13 bases, and we went from about 20,000 troops to 7,800. And winning for us was really not defeating the enemy. What winning for us was to get the Afghan security forces in the lead so they were responsible for securing their country. As I told our troops, the Afghans are no different than us. if you're willing to mow their lawn every weekend, they will certainly let you. Now, the problem I had with that, the Afghans don't have lawns, so I had to come up with a different analogy. Anyways, when we left Afghanistan, they were doing about 97% of the operations unilaterally, and based on the recent reports from 10th Mountain Division with Steve Townsend and my brigade commanders, that is what they did during the elections. So they were able, as Steve said, except for a few show of forces by fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft, the Afghans were able to secure their own election, which, quite frankly, for those who have been over there, I think is a big deal. And though there's certainly challenges ahead, they're going to have to do another runoff in June. The Afghan security forces have come a long way. They routinely provide their own indirect fire in RC East with D-30s. They medevac their own casualties, mostly by ground, but they do use Mi-17s. They clear their own routes, and that's a pretty amazing thing when you think about it. They don't have the sophisticated equipment they have, but they can look at the ground, and just the fact they live there, they can see IEDs a lot better than we can, and when they're deliberate, they actually outperform our route clearance packages on doing route clearance operations, and they have the ability to resupply their units in the field, although they do have some challenges at the higher levels, especially at the core and above with logistics. But really, most importantly, since they've been in the lead and they're doing most of the combat operations, the narrative in Afghanistan is starting to shift against the enemies of Afghanistan. Where before they could say that they were fighting foreign occupiers. The enemies of Afghanistan would say they were fighting foreign occupiers or they were fighting infidels. That no longer rings true. In fact, they're fighting Afghans and they're killing Afghan people. And quite frankly, a lot of the people are starting to turn against them as we go forward. So the Afghans still have a lot to do. There's a political transition coming up. But I think to the folks in the audience that have contributed blood, sweat, and tears, you can be very, very proud of what you did in Afghanistan because you have given them an opportunity for a future. Next slide. We hear a lot about budget challenges, and we can anticipate some tough decisions as we go forward by the senior leadership because we cannot afford, as General Campbell said, the structure, the readiness and modernization that we have and we all desire. And really for us at the 101st, at the division level, we have to take the resources we get and we have to get the most out of them. Many of our aviators are mostly tied to their aerial platforms, but for those who have been around for a few years and see many of the aircraft that we were flying sitting on pedestals in front of aviation headquarters, we know that the cavalry is an attitude and not an aerial platform. And as I go forward, I think we can make great strides in aviation by man-unmanned, really getting after and putting the cavalry attitude into the man-unmanned teaming concept. I've already seen strides made in that from the time when we were in Iraq. And I remember, back we thought we were cutting edge because we're just starting to use UAVs or UASs in our operations. And I remember one day we had picked up a mortar team in Abu Ghraib. And we were all excited. We found them, and we're trying to do a handoff to a Kiowa warrior team that was conducting combat operations in the area. So the mortar team got in a white vehicle, and they started hightailing down the road from Abu Ghraib onto Fallujah. And, of course, we're seeing this, and we're trying to give instructions to the pilots in the aircraft. And, of course, they're in a white vehicle. And those who have been to Iraq know that when you're on the highways, about every single vehicle on the road is a white vehicle. So here we are trying to talk this Kiowa warrior team onto a target, and we're basically saying, hey, it's a white vehicle. And of course, they come back, well, there's 100 white vehicles. So we have the UAV directing, seeing through the soda straw, and we're talking the Kiowa warrior, hey, go to this white vehicle. Nope, that's not it. Go to the other white vehicle. And after about 5 or 6 white vehicles flying over the rooftop, we found the right one, and they did what all good cavalry pilots did, was they took it out. And, we started to think about, wow, imagine if we had lasers in that UAV, or we had the ability to see that same sight picture that they had, how much better would things would go. And we rolled a little forward, and you know, a lot of, and Wally Golan was over the same thing as as fellow brigade commanders. We started looking at how we could use the UAVs in some of the more difficult places. We were sending Apache and Kiowa teams, you know, over cities like Sardis City and Fallujah and some of the other places, and Najaf, and our aircraft were getting shot up a lot while we tried to find the enemy. And we decided that, you know, wow, what a difference we make if we had the capability to find with UAVs. And even better, what if the UAVs had the capability, or the UASs had the ability to actually laze for us so we could do handoffs. And all that is starting to come together, and I think that is making a difference about how we're going to fight aviation. The third thing I've seen, which is just starting to happen, a lot of the units in our young aviators are going to take this to the next level. They're going to see things that we don't see. They're a lot more technologically savvy than we are, is the idea of sharing videos. And it seems like you know, what's the big deal about being able to see what the UAV's seeing in the cockpit? I will tell you, having watched, you know, engagements throughout Iraq and Afghanistan, it's a great feeling knowing that when you're giving a handoff to an attack helicopter, they are looking at the same target that you're doing, and being absolutely sure with the sensitive environments that we work in, with civilians casualties always a concern, that you know that that target handoff that you're giving is precisely what the attack helicopter is doing. And I think that is something that is really going to make a difference as we go forward. So really, as we start to look at the man-unmanned teaming, the using the unmanned aerial systems really to fight for information rather than just to gather. And I think as we work this with our great young aviators, we're going to see some incredible results. And so I challenge a lot of the young aviators out there to think about how they can use that cavalry attitude, how they can bring it into the man-unmanned systems, and how we can start to use that for different fights that may be different than the fight we have right now. You know, I think as the war winds down, and go to the next slide. You know, as the war winds down in Afghanistan, I think we need to acknowledge that we've been doing a lot of counterinsurgency operations, and really in a fairly low threat, and it's certainly a dangerous place, but it's not the high threat that we saw during the initial part of Iraq and some of the other places. There's certainly a dangerous out there, but really what this has equated to us is we're doing a lot of lethal agile team type operations. You know, the 2-ship, possibly 4-ship operation is really what we've come, and we got great agility in that. And, you know, a company of infantry can pretty much defeat anything we're going to see in Afghanistan with enablers. But that's not the way it's always going to be, and quite frankly, we need to get ready for our next rendezvous with destiny. We need to prepare to provide the nation that this decisive land power that we know we need. And this picture is here. You know, we just went back to our roots at the 101st Airborne Division. We hadn't done a brigade air assault, and I know there's a lot of 101st graybeards out here. We used to do them every 6 weeks, but we hadn't done one in 10 years. And we went through that when Tom Drew and J.B. Vowell basically spent 4 months of extensive training to bring our folks back with a skill set, starting getting folks back in air assault school, getting our numbers up to 70%, making sure folks know how to rig big loads, making sure that we can fly in much larger formations. And, you know, as we said, most of the air assaults we're doing in Afghanistan were 2 to 4 shippers. And to get our young aviators to see what 21 Blackhawks in formation look like going into the light PZ, or 7 or 8 Chinooks carrying a whole bunch of loads going into the heavy PZ, that's something that I think we have to do. So as we come out of this war with these extraordinary combat-proven young officers, NCOs, and soldiers, we have to get back to our core competencies. We're going to have to challenge them with realistic and tough training and operations, and we're going to have to give them the opportunities to excel and grow, because we have got to keep them on this team. And we have to remember that the Army is people and that people matter. Thank you, and God bless all our soldiers serving in harm's way, Air Assault.